We had planned this morning for Bob to sing a song called Japanese Bowl that fit perfectly into my sermon, and in fact, I had to rewrite the first few lines. But we're going to even just take that as a metaphor for the rest of the service, and I think it will make sense as we go along. We're going to talk today a little bit about the Japanese art of kintsugi. Some of you may know what that is. It's a centuries-old Japanese art form that uses gold dust in the lacquer that is used to repair broken ceramics, with the idea that these visible repairs honor the imperfect, impermanent nature of life and make the object even more beautiful. Is it showing? Okay. There we go. The idea of highlighting the brokenness is rich with metaphor, and it has inspired artists throughout the centuries to explore how things that are broken can be seen as not ready for the trash, but as objects of beauty. One of these artists who has taken the Japanese art and made it something new is a contemporary artist named Victor Solomon. Solomon says he wanted to be a hockey player when he was a kid, but paying for the equipment and the ice time required was beyond his family's budget. So instead, he grew up playing basketball. As an adult, he has come to appreciate how playing basketball requires little beyond a hard surface and a ball, and how coming together on a basketball court in the neighborhood allows for exchange among people who may have very different life experiences. Solomon has created a public art piece in a neighborhood in South LA, where some of the city's most disenfranchised neighborhoods exist. Fittingly, the art is installed on a basketball court. Before the artist began work, the court was cracked and weeds were growing up from the cracks. But Solomon has repaired the court, and here's an image of it. He's used the gold paint to trace the cracks. Those same gold veins like a fine piece of pottery. He says in an interview that he hopes that it can provide a space for healing and togetherness via basketball, a sport he describes as a universally accessible, class-agnostic, race-indifferent platform. Now, there are other artists who have also applied this ancient technique of kintsugi in new ways. This was made by an artist named Charlotte Bailey. Her specialty is embroidery. Although she says she's fascinated by this Japanese mending technique, she has recreated and mended a broken vase by wrapping each broken piece in fabric and then used gold metallic thread to painstakingly patchwork the pieces together. While the process isn't meant to make the vase functional again, it does produce a striking sculptural object. And here's another picture of up close of the repair. Another version of taking broken things and repairing them in visible ways is something I learned about from a New York Times article, and they're called make-do objects. Make do as in make what you have work rather than buy something new. So here are some pictures and a teapot from a collector's home. You can see the visible repairs. The spouts are replaced with metal. The handle of one replaced with metal, and one has a little extra flair. And here's another example, a pitcher and a mug with a new handle on the pitcher and a new base on the bowl, or on the mug, right? Yeah, and on the bowl. So this last example I want to share is something that was newer to me, but you'll find it if you spend any time online looking up fabric art, and it's called visible mending. Here's a sweater that's been repaired with visible mending, with fabric patches and stitching. And here's another, a pair of jeans, patched with colorful fabric and colorful thread. This is different from other ideas of mending where you try to mend it where the fix is not visible at all. In these examples, it does reflect a desire to live in a more sustainable way, but also the result is not just that you get more use out of an object and avoid buying something new, but you create something more beautiful and more interesting and sometimes with more significance. So this, of course, has made me think of the movie Barbie, right? Logical step. Has anybody seen it? Yeah, okay. So if you have, just in case you haven't, here's a refresher. In the movie, Barbie goes on a journey from Barbie Land to the real world. Now, life in Barbie Land is a perpetual dance party, with every day more perfect than the last, if that were possible. The real world is the world we live in, with conflict, greed, hatred, constant change. So while Barbie is on her sojourn into the real world, she sits down on a bench at a bus stop, and next to her is an older woman. Barbie, as you might know, is played by Margot Robbie, whose appearance could be used as a measure for what could be called Hollywood perfect. You've seen her, yes, the flawless skin. The woman at the bus stop looks just like a regular 70-something woman. Her face is wrinkled, her hair is graying. She's not wearing anything fancy. Now, Barbie, who has lived in Barbie Land until now, has never seen an aging person, and she is enthralled. She stares at the woman for a bit, and then she breathes out, "You're beautiful." And the woman smiles at her and says simply, "I know." Until her foray into the real world, Barbie has lived in an unchanging reality where the Barbies believe that they have solved every human problem. There's no need to think about aging or mortality because those things do not exist in Barbie Land. On the face of the woman at the bus stop, though, Barbie sees a person who has lived in the real world where aging is a thing, as is loss and grief and disappointment. The woman's age and experience show on her face, and Barbie pronounces it beautiful. We humans who have experienced loss and grief in our reality outside of the movies do not always welcome the visible marks that these experiences leave on us. We whose hearts have been broken by events in our lives don't have the benefit of gold lacquer to beautify and to show the world how we've healed. But there is something beautiful about a person who has experienced suffering and has healed from it. Now, hear me well, that I'm not saying that suffering itself is somehow beautiful or desirable. I don't believe that. Everyone, except those headed for enlightenment, will experience suffering in this life, and there's nothing redeeming about the suffering itself. It's mostly just terrible. But the healing can open us. The healing of our hearts can open us to more empathy, more joy, because we know what it's like to feel broken. A couple of years ago, one of my good friends from high school lost her dad. I texted her and I sent a card and expressed my condolences. I had known her dad. He was a quirky guy who could build anything. And I knew also that their relationship had been kind of complicated. Several weeks later, she sent me a message that included an apology. I was surprised because I didn't think there was anything she needed to apologize for. We hadn't seen one another since she had come to my mom's memorial service several years before. But in her apology, she told me how sorry she was for how she had responded, or actually not responded, when my mom died. She said, "I just didn't know how it felt, and now I do. I'm sorry that I wasn't a good friend to you through that." We talked, and we commiserated about being part of a club that no one wants to belong to. There is a reason why people who have had a specific experience of loss find comfort and companionship with people who've been through the same thing. Grief groups for cancer survivors, and groups for specific illnesses fill this need of helping people to be able to talk with other people who really understand. Which is not to say you can't be a good friend to someone who's going through something you haven't experienced, but being that good friend requires an willingness to set aside your own assumptions about how they might be feeling and truly listen. It means remembering to never say, you hear me? Never say, I know just how you feel, because you can't. Brian Doyle's beautiful piece that Hubert read earlier reminds us that walling up our broken hearts is a possibility, but that both joy and sorrow have power to break through that wall. He writes, "When we are older, we know that all hearts finally are bruised and scarred, scored and torn, repaired by time and will, patched by force of character, yet fragile and rickety forevermore, no matter how ferocious the defense and how many bricks you add to the wall. You can brick up your heart as stout and tight and hard and cold and impregnable as you possibly can, and down it comes in an instant." He then lists the beautiful and tragic things that might make the wall erected around your heart fall again. The feel of your mother's hand in your hair, the breath of a child, shatter of glass. The wall around the heart falling allows the heart to be vulnerable again to breaking. Allowing in the beautiful things also allows in the tragic. I've spoken in services before about using my own imaginary universal translator when I encounter religious beliefs that I do not share. I've become more adept at doing that through the years. For example, I can hear a prayer about the kingdom of God, and I translate into beloved community, and it works for me. In this way, I can explore that theological language while honoring my own beliefs and staying in integrity. But a concept that I've had trouble translating that's often used by our Christian friends is the concept of salvation. But this week I had a breakthrough. As I was thinking about and researching for this sermon, my Google searches often, when I typed in brokenness, often brought up prayers about salvation. And for me, as someone who does not believe, one, that humans are inherently sinful, or two, that hell exists, this concept has not felt very applicable to my life. I don't believe that we need to be saved from our natures or from eternal torment. But this week, a blog post landed in my inbox from Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber, the same person who wrote the sort of snarky blessing for the new year I shared a few weeks ago. In this new post, she mentioned that the Greek word that has been translated as salvation in English in the Bible, that Greek word can also mean wholeness. Whoa, right? That opened up a whole new way for me to consider what salvation can mean for a religious humanist. I also have trouble with the concept of sin, but that I can translate into separation, as in separation from the spirit of love. I conceive of sin as anything that moves a person away from their inherent goodness and the universal love that surrounds and holds us. With a new understanding about the translation of the Greek, salvation now makes sense to me as healing from an experience of being separated from love and becoming whole again. Sin and salvation. Whew. Yeah. The items that we saw earlier, repaired with visible gold lacquer or thread, with metal parts added, colorful stitches and patches, have experienced this kind of transformation and, dare I say, salvation, in that they have been saved for use, but more importantly, they have been made whole again, not in a way that is perfect and not in a way that hides the fact that they are broken, but in a way that makes them more interesting and more beautiful than they were before. Can you translate it into how that works for humans? Yeah. I want to share another poem called The Unbroken by Rashani Ray. It says, "There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside which is unbreakable and whole while learning to sing. Wherever you are in the cycle of breaking and healing, of sin and salvation, if those words work for you, whether you are currently breaking open or if you're the person who's helping others learn to sing, may you remember that you have a part in healing this brokenness. That love gives us the tools, and love calls us to be love's hands and feet in this world. We each can do what we can to heal the brokenness of our world and to make it into something more beautiful. Amen, and may it be so.